Good evening. Im Gespräch, conversations. It's a loose program, what we do. We invite quite, regularly, but it's a loose program. Important guests from the field of art as such, not only artists, curators, also gallerists, we have already quite an interesting lineup. Jürgen Meyer-Hermann, an example, was here. Ken Lam will be talking with us soon, and Konstantin Gricic will talk with us soon. Adam Cimczyk, the upcoming documenta director. But now we focus on the Berlin Biennale. The Berlin Biennale's curator, Juan Gaitán, very warm welcome. Before we start to talk, we won't show any images, I'm afraid.
It hasn't happened yet. We have no images to show.
That means the show opens in about a month. When exactly?
28th of May.
So this is not a PR tour here. No. This is what was quite important here for us, that we thought that we were more talking about the biennial as a challenge, the biennial model as a challenge, as a recent challenge for the life of contemporary art as such. Yeah. So some basic information about the Berlin Biennale. 1996 founded by Klaus Biesenbach and a group of collectors and patrons of the arts such as Eberhard Mainz. Eberhard Mainz is a very well-known collector. In German collector, he donated a lot of artworks to the National Gallery, an example. The Berlin Biennale is realized by the KW Institute, the Kunstwerke for Contemporary Art. Since its fourth edition is one of the institutions supported by the German Federal Cultural Foundation with 2.5 million euros per edition, which ensures you can disagree, the planning stability, enabling the organizers to address issues of content in a very experimental way. This is how the self-description of the Biennale. The 2.5 million, is it enough?
No.
The idea of establishing a Biennale in Germany, and this is the only Biennale in Germany, documenta every 4 years in the beginning, then 5 years. It's the only Biennale in Germany, was inspired by the Venice Biennale in 1995, following the idea of the aperto model. The Forum for Young Contemporary Art, founded in 1981, and then it was in 1995, it was also the last edition of the aperto model in Venice. The first curators were the Berlin Biennale 1, Klaus Biesenbach, Nancy Spector, Hans-Ulrich Obrist. In that time, of course now, though they are all very known curators, but in this time they were rather unknown. Hans-Ulrich Obrist was already around, but he was not such a superstar like he is nowadays. Second, Saskia Boss, who is now the director of the Cooper Union in New York, but she used to be it's a Dutch lady. She used to be the director of the Apple Center in Amsterdam. Followed by Ute Meterbauer. Ute Meterbauer, which a lot of you know from her time in Vienna, teaching here at the Academy, art theory and curatorial practice. The fourth edition, Maurizio Cattelan, an artist, the very first time that an artist was one of the curators. Massimiliano Gioni, who is there, also very well known, working for the New Museum and Fondation Trussardi in the Venice Biennale. In the Venice Biennale, which probably lots of you have seen last year, and Alo Subotnik. The fifth biennial, curated by Adam Cimczyk, together with Elena Filipovic. Adam Cimczyk, the upcoming curator, artistic director for Documenta, I forgot the edition, 20,
13.
no, 13.
14?
17.
13.
Is it 13? 17? No, no. 13. 14. 14.
This is a good thing to wonder. Once you lose count, what does this mean?
Quite interesting. What does it exactly? What does it mean? Yeah? So, the next, followed by Elena Filipovic. Elena Filipovic, curator at the Wiel Center for Contemporary Art, or Wiel's Art Center in Brussels. Then Katrin Romberg, which I think most of you know from the Viennese. She still lives in Vienna and now is, what is her exact position now at the Erste Bank? She is head of the collection. So the last biennial.
An artist.
An artist, Adam Smiewski, together with Juan A, Warswa and Wojna. And now, this edition this year, Juan Gaitán. We will talk about this here a little bit later. Juan is just, I forgot how old he is. Yeah, but he is, it says 41, it's not true, he's just 40. We met, I forgot, what was it, 7 years ago or 8 years ago?
In Vancouver.
In Vancouver. And from there on, we started to build up, friendship, but then also a working relationship. In that time, I was working for the Witte de With Center for Contemporary Art in Rotterdam, and he joined the team at Witte de With, and then we shared an office for 3 years and worked on quite a large project called Morality, and among other things. But this is so that means I was very proud when he got nominated, being the curator for the Berlin Biennale.
You were the first person to know, I think.
What?
You were the first person to know that I got. I sent you a message on that.
Okay, yeah, then tell me a little bit. This is very, I get red, it's good. Okay, then, it's true. Have you been surprised? How did you, starting with the biennial you have seen before, when you had the interview with the committee who has chosen you, the biennial curated by Artur Smiewski was really much, I would say, disliked.
Yeah.
So, how did you separate your ideas from his? Have you been? I know that you like his work.
Yeah. First, thank you for having me here, and for you for being here. This question came up a lot. How is my biennial going to be different from Smiewski's? But Smiewski is an artist that I respect, and I didn't see his biennial, so it wasn't really very difficult to to get move on from that. Except that I think maybe after the Biennale closes, my Biennale, I can maybe speak more freely about other biennials, because when you're doing it, you also don't want to fall into the inelegant, habit of complaining about your predecessors. But then, when you're doing your own, but I have no complaints. I think in a very interesting way, Smiewski, and I'm not sure he did it on purpose or not, he brought the entire structure of the Biennale into a state of crisis. And maybe this was more productive in the long run than one might think, even if the exhibition itself, of which I have no opinion because I didn't see it, was not as successful because I think it had like three artists. So of course I'm not that kind of curator. The Biennale will have more than 50 and new productions. But there is something, as an anecdote, Teresa Margolles was in this exhibition, and she told me that on the opening day she was so angry, and she doesn't speak anything but Spanish, and he barely speaks at all. So to communicate her anger, she bit him. But if you provoke such reactions, you must be doing something right at the same time, I think. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the Biennale, as you know, because you also work the same way, it starts with the artists themselves. In my case, I don't have a very strict point to make and then have the artists contribute to my statement. I let things develop in a certain way in relation to what the artists are proposing, and I enjoy doing that. So that was kind of...
That means you're let's call it the thematical frame that came afterwards, after you invited the first artist, or before?
There were two parts, and I realized this only later. It's the 8th Berlin Biennale, so everyone seems to remember the number still. And I think it still has a close relationship to the city, to Berlin. And I was trying to understand, there was no particular theme, although I was already thinking of the museum in Dahlem, which actually the first time I visited was with you. And I wanted to use this building because, as some of you might know, it's the Ethnographic Museum, Asian Art Museum, and something called the European Cultures Museum, which one should never visit, are housed in this building. And before, they also had all the paintings that are now in the Gemälde Gallery and the Altes Museum and so on, when the city was divided between East and West Berlin. And then now they want to move this museum to the center.
In the former West.
Former West. So they want to move the Ethnographic Museum and the Asian Art Museum to this thing called the Humboldt Forum. And it's a very controversial project. So I purposefully wanted to use this building not to make any direct statement about or not to foreground it with my opinion about what this means, but to put the finger on it so that it actually continues, the conversation continues. It's a conversation that is 10 years old but has had no effect on public policy. So I wanted the Biennale there. And at some point I thought the best thing to do was to separate the statement the Biennale is doing about Berlin and the exhibition itself to some extent, so that the artists are not brought in as examples, let's say, or to justify a curatorial approach, but they are free to have their work, and the framework I am constructing is still, let's say, structured on this situation in the city, and asking people to go to West Berlin, which is unusual for most visitors to that part of West Berlin, in Berlin.
Which is really not in the center, and there is a second location in a house am Waldsee, which is even...
it's quite close to Dahlem.
Yes, it's close to Dahlem.
It's a charming lakeside villa, yeah.
But why did you kept the Kunstwerke KW Institute? So
we considered it, but to be honest, I was having, there were a couple of reasons. I mean, I should say there is obviously a logistical reason. Most people will automatically go to the cave anyway to look for the Biennale, because many people arrive without actually having looked at what's going on. They just show up. Another reason is that the venue is there. If I don't use that venue, I have to get another one. Each venue you add creates, puts pressure on the budget. And there was only so much I was willing to move out of the production, or actually sacrifice. I didn't want to move money out of the production budget into the installation and venue you have to rent and guards and so on. So the Kunstwerke is automatically there and available, But more importantly, I think, was a moment when I had a conversation with Wolfgang Tillmans, and I suggested not using the cave, and he said, "Why is it that people want to empty out centers for contemporary art? We have so little. Shouldn't we actually be putting art in them?" And I thought that made a lot of sense, so I decided to use it. Yeah.
Is he participating?
As a friend, in a way, and
not as an artist.
As an artist too.
No, but you have, you build up you call it artistic team of the.
Yeah.
He is, if you just a reminder who is in it, it's quite a lot. No, Sadan Afif.
Well, actually, the team itself is Tarek and Olaf Jan are officially in the team. The other names appear because, for different reasons, they have already been made public in other situations. So we're gradually revealing the artist list is what's going on.
Okay, but do they function as advisors or?
To be honest, I wanted three artist names in the artistic team it's not that they are fully involved in the development of the Biennale. It was a way of making a public statement about the fact that the artists are as important in the process of constructing the Biennale and thinking about it as the curators. So I didn't want a team of only curators, because that gives the false impression that there are the curators on one side and the artists on the other. And in my case, and I know also in your case, we have continuous dialogues with artists, and those are very important. So I wanted, but in the case of Tarek, he's actually developing a project from the very beginning, and Olaf I invited as an advisor, but also
Olaf Nicolai,
as someone who knows very much about Berlin and German history, and I thought that was something that was important for me to have.
But where do you see your curatorial authorship then? Is there any?
Yeah, no, there is. I mean, the framing of all this is the curatorial authorship. You cannot avoid it. So everything that is said about the Berlin Biennale, all this discussion about Berlin, West Berlin, the 19th century, and how it's being resuscitated, let's say, in the buildings around Unter den Linden, all those things are me. So that's how the press is speaking about the Biennale, and that's what's preparing the approach. So when people come to the Biennale, this is what they will have in mind.
Do you really think people visiting the Biennale, or Berliners even, still think about West, the distinction of West and East, and where is the center? And is it still relevant? There is a generation, let's see, people under 35, which for them must be completely irrelevant.
You would think so, yes, but no. It actually is quite still, as you know, there's a generation that identifies, will tell you I'm from East Germany, West Germany, and so on. But the younger, there is such a heavy discourse on the east and westness of Berlin that you still see it repeated over and over again. And I did want to move out of that by focusing on the center, on Mitte, as this kind of void that is being created. So there are three, in a way. There is the former East Berlin, the former West Berlin, and then Mitte, which is a very strange hybrid that is constructed according to a political project, and not really, it has not grown organically, let's say. It has grown because politicians have made the big decisions on how it should look and where the avenues should go.
But the population there is made up by non-Berliners.
Exactly.
So this is quite interesting.
Yeah. But the younger generation, they still want to go to Kreuzberg and Neukölln, and there is still a little bit of it's not the same, but there's still some, let's say, remnants of the romance of East Berlin. But it's not. You're right. not even remotely what it was before.
But how does it translate into the exhibition then? So, in the or is there any translation in the artworks we will see?
So, what I have done is to focus the whole dialogue around the Biennale on this situation, the moving of the museums and the management of the museums and the reconstruction of the 19th or the Prussian heritage of Berlin, which I find very problematic. And I have, at the same time, formulated a series of exhibitions, 3, one for each of the venues, that have to do with display and how contemporary art appears today in relation to other forms of cultural artifacts that are represented in cultural institutions. So you will go to the museum in Dahlem. When you go to Cave, it will be a Cave exhibition, artworks inside a contemporary art center that is more and more inadequate for contemporary art, because the floors are uneven, the walls are a disaster, there's tubes everywhere. I mean, it's very challenging to install a contemporary art show in that building. In the case of the museum in Dahlem, you have, I asked the artists not to propose anything within the collections of the museum. So I installed a 4th museum, let's say. And you have the areas that are only contemporary art, so Berlin Biennale, but at any time you can or even have to go through the ethnographic museum. And these are 2 entirely different relationships that we have. Contemporary art, you expect, or you are expected to reflect on your own reality. And when you're looking at ethnographic objects, I guess the expectation is that you think you may understand another culture and another time and another place, and that was kind of. And then the artists themselves are from all over. I mean, they're really from all over. But I wanted to invite artists who were already working with understanding how, as individuals, they fit into a larger historical narrative that is not necessarily the Western narrative, but their own place. So it's more about affect that the Biennale is. The works are focused on affect, but not affect as emotion, but affect as how your own affective relationship to your own history is dealt with through contemporary art.
Did you address a certain, a specific assignment somehow? No? No.
I selected artists who I thought could already develop a work that in one way or another would relate to this.
At the Biennale conference in the ZKM Institute a couple of weeks ago, you're the co-director of or financial director of the Biennale said there are 45 new productions.
Yes.
How that's... I've been quite surprised. 45 new productions, and I know how much it cost. How do you deal with this 2.5 million, euro as a productions? What is a new production? Probably. Can you define this? What does it mean?
Well, it means quite simply that I asked everyone to make a new work for the Biennale. I said depending on who I was talking to and what moment in the process, I might have said different things about what I was thinking about, but they were always, to some extent, related to this idea that the farther away you are from a place, the less relevant it becomes to you as a point of reference. So some people will understand Berlin quite profoundly, but I wasn't asking artists who are coming from South America or from Asia to make a work about Berlin, because some of them had never even been to the city. But I looked at the work and I said, okay, I think I actually like this and this and this in your work. I would like you to make a new piece for the Biennale, and you have 5,000 euro to make it. And then, of course, no one can make a new work now with 5,000 euros. But then the process starts, and you start finding the resources one way or another, and this is what most of my time has how it's been spent, trying to see who might support each of the different productions that we're doing, and some of them are not so much higher than 5,000, but some of them, yes, are 100 or 150,000 euro to make. But it's, in a way, it's been possible, I think, by the fact that it's the Berlin Biennale and now it's a recognized platform, and people are willing to support big productions for this.
Do you think, Berlin has such a diverse art scene, and not many institutions, for actual art, contemporary and actual art. I was quite surprised at this conference in Karlsruhe when Kaspar König, who's the famous curator Kaspar König, who's also the curator of Manifesta in St. Petersburg, he said, the Berlin Biennale, I have to say it first in German, and then I translate it, ist so unwichtig wie ein Kropf. I know that you got it's something what it's a tumor, it needs to be cut out of of the system of Berlin. He thinks it's irrelevant. It makes no sense having a biennale in Berlin. I know that you have heard about it, of course, but what do you think about if someone of who of his
stature,
and media's stature?
I guess if it's a tumor, it might actually be good, because maybe that's what Berlin needs.
No, but it's quite interesting. But do you really think it's a time? And then also, I was listening to a lecture of Ute Meter-Bauer at the conference. She is a member or the co-founder of the so-called Biennale Foundation. And then she said, "Okay, biennales." She sounded very pessimistic about the future of biennales.
Who did?
Who not? Yeah. But no, Ute Meter-Bauer.
Yeah.
She said we got a bit tired.
Yeah. Apparently there's a biennial every week somewhere in the world. I mean, you cannot totally agree or totally disagree with Kaspar. I think it's a ridiculous thing to say, but at the same time, yes, we all are aware that the biennial model is quite is collapsed, and it exists only because there are places that cannot afford a museum. I am sure if they could pay for a museum building, they would not do a biennial. Like Doha, they don't need a biennial. They can build 5 museums simultaneously. So a biennial is a cheap way of having contemporary art and culture present in a place when you cannot pay 5 or 10 or 25 or whatever million euros to make your own signature building and have a collection inside. So of course it supplies a demand for presence of symbolic capital. At the same time, I think this is true for basically every cultural institution right now. It's not just the biennales, they're all in crisis, and this is what's interesting to me to explore in Berlin, that you have all these museums. The welfare state, as you know, was invented in Germany, but in Prussian times. So it was the invention of empire, and throughout the 20th century in Western Europe, especially, the idea was that you have cultural institutions because they are edifying institutions, and it's the responsibility of the state to keep them in good shape, and it's the responsibility of the citizen to study what goes on inside these institutions. But this relationship has shifted completely, and now the state demands that the institutions take care of their own finances and, you know, have enough visitors that they don't need state funding. And visitors just want to be entertained according not to themselves, but to some official idea of visitor numbers, you know. So it's a kind of, I think it's a very critical moment for cultural institutions in general, and the biennales, of course, are in crisis. Some of them are emulating museums, but they can still. But we need to work with what there is to see how they can actually counteract what is happening elsewhere, right? So the museums in Berlin, I think everybody knows, are kind of a disaster. They don't have an original program. They are very local, provincial, and so on. So maybe the Berlin Biennale has to be this tumor.
Interesting. How many people? It's not about the visitor numbers, but how many? Do you know a little bit about the percentage of locals who will visit the
Berlin Biennale?
Yeah, and tourists? I'm asking this because is it a marketing tool for the city only, or really does it bring a surplus value towards the citizenry?
Yeah. I mean, I still have not been able to get a straight answer about this question. I've asked it several times, no one knows. The last Berlin Biennale was free, so they cannot really count that number. Because they think it's high because it was free, and normally it isn't free. It's like 15 euros. The larger portion of the visitors are young art practitioners who live in Berlin, I guess. And the largest number of international visitors show up for the opening week, maybe before and after Basel Art Fair, and that's about it. I don't think people will do trip to Berlin to see the Berlin Biennale. I didn't do it last time myself, so you know. So it's a kind of local audience, and because it really has a different distribution and a different approach each time, it's very hard to say if there is a consistent growth in this number or not, because the Kunstwerke can only take a certain amount of visitors at a time anyway. And in this case, the Haus am Waldsee is a very small place, and the Dahlem Museum is huge. And I assume that when visitors come, they will be all counted, even the ones that are not visiting the Biennale.
But what do you want to tell your visitors? What do they should take with them away?
Yeah. One aspect is that Berlin is bigger than Mitte. Simple, but not so simple. If you go to this university town and see that there is a program, the city has a program to concentrate all the symbolic capital in Mitte, and what does this how does this reflect its policy towards the rest of Berlin? Yeah.
Okay, but Dahlem is one of the richest areas.
Yeah, of course, I know that.
Yeah, it's the second Mitte.
Yeah, and they themselves don't seem to care that the museum is going, so that's another thing that I wonder about, you know, like there's not a local group of opponents of the moving of Ethnography Museum to the Humboldt Forum in Mitte, which is interesting. Then, but it's not about the affluence, it's also a university town, and it's a research museum, and it will stop being a research museum or a research institution. And I also think the most important thing is to, by doing this, asking that we think about the city differently, that we stop thinking it only as East and West and so on, because that has, as you say, become irrelevant. I wanted to use only cultural institutions, because it's not true anymore that Berlin has available space. It's all owned by real estate speculators, all of it. I went all over Berlin, and the first thing I learned was that every single building you visit is owned by someone who wants to make profit from it. And so so it's also take away this romance of Berlin as the city of available space and big cheap apartments and so on. So in terms of the experience of the city, it's that. And in terms of contemporary art, I think it's the unevenness of contemporary practices, depending on where they come, but also this very touching relationship, or to be close to the individual as a person who makes and thinks about their own history. This is what I want to, and to face the works in themselves. So there's very little interpretation in the Biennale. You will not see much texts explaining works or nothing like that. You just have to kind of face the works alone, in a way.
Do you think we need new forms other than exhibition making for the model of a biennial?
I think the desire of a younger generation to be original with exhibition formats have kind of killed the possibility of coming up with new forms. I think what we need is to find the potential of the existing platforms. You see what I mean? Like,
can you be a little bit more precise?
There's a lot of experimental exhibitions that are not there, or you go and there's no art. Or
what is experimental for you?
What is experimental? I don't know actually the answer.
No, this it's quite. No, I also not. I try to avoid. It's always when I'm in interviews, which make me sometimes extremely aggressive. It's always it's about experiment and vision. Yeah, and that, you know, so it's hard to define. Yeah. So you can't be visionary. Yeah, it's really not. You know, it's not. We are not talking about a science fiction. You know, so and this is to maybe. Of course, we are in the same situation. Doing a non-collecting institution is an ongoing biennial, which you know what you do, what we did together in Rotterdam. You have to produce every second, together with your team and as an institution, as a mini biennials. I never see. This is a challenge, but what I also like, I never. For me, the individual exhibition is extremely important, but curatorially, in a way, irrelevant. You know, I see more the context of 1 year or 2 years. You know, it's storytelling in a way, in how I understand your biennial, and your way of doing exhibitions. You want to tell a story.
No, I don't want to.
No.
Did I say I wanted to tell a story?
Yes,
no, what story?
Of course.
Absolutely not.
No, but you do, in a way, you do.
There is no story.
Yes, you tell us the story of thinking Berlin in a different way.
Yeah, I know. I want people to recognize that when you go, I backtrack a little bit. When you go to Berlin Mitte and you walk down Unter den Linden, which is now a museum of Prussian heritage, and you have this new thing that they're building, which has 3 facades that are the replica of a Prussian palace, inside of which they want to put an ethnographic collection. And the inside of this building looks like the typical sort of the flavorless, neoclassical, modern building, like, for example, the Magba in Barcelona. So it's any building, right? But surrounding this any building, whatever, there is this shell that looks Prussian. And they tell you that what they want is to link, to recreate the original Prussian flavor of this part of town. You're actually asked to as a visitor, you're asked to experience the history of Germany, yeah? And this is exactly what I am trying to do against, but this is at the level of your experience of moving between Mitte and Dahlem. Once in the exhibition, what I want you to do is look at contemporary art. Mm-hmm. It's very simple, you know, like contemporary art, new contemporary artworks, new productions, and to look at them for what they are and have them in different settings so that you realize that there is no clear tie between a contemporary artwork and a gray floor and a white wall. You know, like it's a very complicated structure, this building inside. So it all has to change, and each venue you visit, you have to face the fact that the white cube is quite a heavy signifier and it's not a neutral space. And so it's more about this encounter with contemporary artworks that's in the exhibition itself. This is what I want. But this is why I separated two things, so that I didn't want to tell a story through the works, but I do want to make a point through the cartography of the Biennale. See, this is why this flyer that some of you have has the map of the Biennale in advance, so that people are first psychologically prepared to take a 30-minute S-Bahn ride and to see that the city that we are drawing is not the typical, you know, kind of...
Is it not a little bit moralistic? You know, in a way, indirectly, you are criticizing the upcoming fake building of history, you know, and what you tell, in a way, you pinpoint on that and tell that it's wrong what is happening there without saying it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It might be moral point of view, but I do think it's a mistake, is misleading to presume that it's okay to reconstruct a building that belongs to the moment in which Germany was an active colonial empire, and then put the collection that it built at that time inside this building. So I think this is totally wrong.
I agree with you. I also find it extremely perverse. So, but that had totally perverse. And of course, this is it's a long discussion going on about this Humboldt Forum already since almost 25 years, or at least 20 years. No, but that has, I think when you said earlier that everything is earned by real estate and making money with empty buildings, or this is also just about making money, you know?
Yeah, of course.
The Humboldt Forum.
Yeah, but what I meant to say is the first thing you do when you start doing the Berlin Biennale is to look for venues. And quickly you realize that this Berlin, still some people think of Berlin, you know, big apartments, cheap rent, and, you know, lots of empty spaces, and that's not true. So I wanted to avoid using those buildings because I didn't want to continue to falsify the reality of Berlin, which is a city that is in transition, and it's completely controlled by corporate interests or financial interests, even if they are not doing as well as in Hamburg or Munich. That's the aspiration. See what I mean? So that was just a point to explain why I didn't want to use the typical spaces that the Berlin Biennale tends to use, like, you know, abandoned department stores and things like this. Like the school they used in Catalan, the Jewish girls' school across the street from the Cave, now has one of the most expensive restaurants and bars in Berlin inside. And Eigenen Art is upstairs, and there's a kosher restaurant in the other side. So you see, it's not that anymore.
Yeah, maybe you will help Dahlem to get a hot spot of what do they do with the empty building in the future? I forgot, or I haven't heard about any plans what will happen.
No one knows.
No one knows. Yeah, it's like with the Tempelhofer Uferfeld. Probably some more social housing for 70% of the population in Berlin are living from transfer money, and that is, the poorest city in Middle Europe. I thought, it's funny that we talked now quite a lot about your biennial.
You were just in Sydney.
Oh yes, so I just was in Sydney, but I was not the only one. Can I ask Marko Lulic a question? He's there, Marko, because he was participating in the Sydney Biennial. And I was invited there, I was there as a visitor. It's interesting, what did you expect? Have you invited him for your biennial? No?
Did I invite you, Marko?
I don't know anything about it.
I sent you so many emails you never answered.
No, but can you, it's from can you tell us a little bit about your experience I will tell it later. So the experience, were you proud being invited? Was it important to you? Why have you participated? Such a long trip.
It was a very long trip. Yeah. I liked participating and I liked the biennial, but of course I'm not objective as a participant. What I thought now listening to the plans of this biennial and what is maybe a parallel is that it was also very heterogeneous concept with different locations. 3 institutions, and 2 of the other locations were kind of former industrial building that was also former jail on Cockatoo Island. That's where my work was, and the other one was carriage works, so German we would say Remise.
But it was, there were not a lot of new assignments. Your work was curated, and not you as an artist. Your work was curated, and that it was most completely different to your.
That was very different.
Yeah, very different.
My work was old. A lot of the works were just created existing works, but what is also due to the fact that it's a bit far, so you couldn't easily travel there 3-4 times to prepare work, so maybe that's also due to this fact. There the criticism was very much about the heterogeneity of the exhibition, so that was a problem maybe for the local audience, but that was also very much tainted there through this debate, because there was this protest, as you know, because of Transfield.
Yeah, but this, I think most of our audience don't know. That, And can you summarize that? That was really, I think, an extremely interesting part of the Biennale, that about, I think, in the beginning, 5 artists withdrew from the Biennale.
Transfield is a company that is engaged in these deportation centers that are on 2 islands close to Australia. And the Belgiorno family, one of the local families, is involved with Transfield. And Luca Belgiorno was the head of the board. So the result in the end was that he withdrew. The next result was that the right-wing government was then threatening when the Biennale opened to cut also the state funding, as they turned down the private money as a result of the protest. So there was a lot of discussion about it. What I see maybe as a general thing about it is that these biennials, in Istanbul last year there was also protest because of the Koch family that's in the board. And so I think that Sydney, Istanbul and Sao Paulo is all like biennials in locations where they were, in a way, having Venice as a model to form it, but of course founded by local rich families who wanted contemporary culture to happen in their cities. And I think this is another crisis additional to those which you have been already describing, that you have these economical ties that are looked at, of course, nowadays more critical at. The sad thing is that the protest in Sydney didn't have any effect on improving the conditions for the refugees being kept in very bad situation in these deportation islands.
I was following the media, not only in Australia, so in general, quite closely, before the biennial opened but also afterwards. So to me, it was really for the very, very first time that it was not about the biennial, not about the artists, not about the curatorial concept. It was only about what, all the side effects, which the withdrew of, the money of the sponsor, but also public money. And this is extremely interesting. And something similar now is happening in Russia, in St. Petersburg. We all know about why. What would you do as if your biennial if you would be the curator of St. Petersburg Manifesta and not Berlin? Would you have cancelled it? That was a question, of course, Kaspar Koenig got asked quite a lot, and he said, of course, not. But, can you collaborate with Russia at the moment?
I mean, I personally think I can't. I have not been offered, but I would like to say I won't. But of course, if I was Kasper and I had already accepted, what has really changed from the moment when he accepted to now? Nothing. You know, even before he was invited, we all knew Russia is a place full of political, ethical, moral compromises. So by saying yes to doing the manifesta itself is a vortex of political and ethical compromises. So you're accepting already a tainted structure in a place that already is quite unappealing, let's say, from our point of view. So why would he cancel it? I mean, he took it knowing full well what he was getting into. I mean, in the case of the Berlin Biennale, I guess it's okay to be funded by the Kulturstiftung des Bundes. And the other main funder is BMW. I don't think any big issues were going to come up with BMW between now and May, but who knows? But the thing with the thing with the Sydney Biennale is different, I think, and than Manifesta, because in the Sydney Biennale, some people knew, but it was not something widely. It was not something that everybody knew about. So it kind of came up in a very difficult moment in the process. And to ask when all this happened, what you described, that he was asked to, they asked the biennial to sever ties with Transfield and so on. Well, I don't know if any of you ever saw this moment in which Chavez met the Queen of England, and she was standing on a podium. He steps up onto the podium, and he decides to go kiss her. And of course, you don't do that to the Queen of England. So she stands back, and she almost falls off the podium. So instead of kissing her, he saved her from falling off the podium. And this is exactly what happened in the Berlin Biennale. They asked the Biennale to sever ties with the president of its board. The board of directors didn't want to, and then he saved the Biennale by removing himself. Is the obscenity of power is the moment in which you realize that it's a very naive, we're very naive compared to the politicians. In this game, we lose. So we lost. Everybody lost, as a matter of fact. And maybe that's the only consolation, is that they lost too. Everybody lost in that one. But the thing is, the problem with the Sydney Biennale starts there, because if you are wanting a clean platform, what does that mean? The Australian government actually hired Transfield. So and it is the main funder of the Sydney Biennale. So what does it mean? It's a very strange psychological trick that we're playing on ourselves to pretend that by him not being there, it's okay to go back. It is as bad as it was before. It's just that this one person we want to blame is not there anymore. And I think that was a very, very telling moment in terms of how we feel that contemporary art can operate in clean, ethical platforms. Those don't exist really anywhere, but they are guaranteed in the case of Germany or Canada by the fact that they have these big government agencies that fund most of it. So it feels that as taxpayers we are paying for it and not, and so on.
I have never seen it. It's not that I don't want to say that I completely dislike the Biennale, but I was surprised about their European approach. Yeah, it's almost only European. I knew 80% of the individual works. Even it was a bit strange. But what I've really thought, I have never seen such the instrumentalization of the format, not necessarily about the art and artworks, but of the format by the state. That's really, I learned something from that. If this is the future of cultural institutions as such, then we are in a huge crisis. So for what are we there for? Is it the institution? That we see it also of course in Austria, in Germany, everywhere, the pressure to be populist, yeah? The pressure to act in front of a diverse audience where we all don't know who is our audience. What definitely changed, and we talked about this when we did morality, arts for art's sake, yeah? This is where we come from. Yeah? Art as an intellectual, emotional and academic platform, yeah, from where we speak out to the world. This was the idea, and there is something completely turning around, yeah, with all cultural institutions, theaters, yeah, musicals, dance, cinema, etc. This is problematic for what I don't think that such an institution that's like the Burgtheater would be funded again nowadays. Sorry. I don't want to have a monologue, no. But
well, I mean the idea in terms, I think I'm following what you just said by saying that the idea that Australia needs to see great productions by great iconic artists is a self-imposed colonial attitude. Why? Why do we need, if you're Australian, why do you need to see Rondinone and that, you know, and things like this? It's not that I don't like Rondinone, I actually do, but why not ask him for a new work? You know, why not ask him to move to Australia for 6 months or something like this? But this idea of
Pippi Lottie-Rist,
and Tacita, who's a wonderful artist, but still, you know, I think the work was already an old one and so on. So this I find, and this is what I think I try to work against by having 45 new commissions in a biennial that doesn't have the structural capacity to do that. So also as the director, artistic director and curator of the Berlin Biennale, I see also my role as putting pressure on the structure to shift and not accepting it and just, you know, working within it. Because one could say, okay, what is my production budget? You have 450,000 euro. Out of 2.5 million, I end up with 450,000 to make works. So then I could say, okay, I do this and this and this and this and that. Does that add up to 450,000? Fine, the Biennale is done. But this is not also, I think, to move it back to our mutual critique of the idea of experimentation, there are a lot of new platforms that present them, or people who present their platforms as experimental, and their talks are so confusing, you have no idea what they are saying. But once you start listening, you start realizing, what are they doing? They're doing exhibitions and public programs and education programs. It's actually always comes down to that. But what I think is important is that the art is there, but in doing it there, having the art there is part of having the artworks there is putting pressure on the institutions to move along with the times and update themselves and respond to what the exigencies of the contemporary situation are, and not, you know, become sedimented in the, you know, kind of or settled, let's say, in their ways, to put it that way. Especially a biennial is able to do that, and this is something we try to do with morality in the Witte de Witt to some extent as well, right?
I know that the 2.5 million by the German Cultural Fellow Foundation is not guaranteed for the next 20 editions. Two. Two more. What will happen then?
Well, I can tell you now, I guess. They gave the 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and then the 8 alone. So everyone was in a panic when I started. I was supposed to save the biennial. I guess they only chose me because I could be charming to the politicians. And then they
don't speak English, you know?
It doesn't matter to them. I'm a foreigner who smiles. And the idea is that for the first basically year, I was dealing with this situation. Will they or will they not give money for the next Berlin Biennale? And at some point they were trying to make it my issue. And I was like, listen, the last one was amazing. If they cannot recognize that, it's not my problem. They have to give money to the Berlin Biennale, period. I mean, what are they going to do? Not giving the... I mean, you touch on something quite interesting, because I refused, in a way, to be part of this.
No, I agree. You are not the institution. Yeah.
But also they wanted...
we are not the institution.
So in many cases they wanted to make this, put pressure on me to tell them what the Biennale was going to be. And at some point I was having these conversations where they were saying, I need to tell something to the politicians. And I'm like, you need to defend the Berlin Biennale. You don't need to present the 8th Berlin Biennale. They won't get it. They don't care. You know that. I know that. So why are you asking me to tell you what the 8th Berlin Biennale will be like? Just deal with it. Your job is to tell them why they should support the 9th and the 10th. So mine is totally irrelevant to this issue, and it was kind of an interesting moment to see that there might have been some chance that the Berlin Biennale would not have been funded, and it most likely would have meant the end of the Berlin Biennale, because, as you know, private sponsors might help something start, but they will not go back to saving it, most likely.
The KW Institute, could it live without the Berlin Biennale or not?
I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. Maybe we can talk about it in private.
Ah, okay. No, I find, you know, this is so interesting when you go to during the time of. Sydney was Sydney has also a couple of very good institutions and museums, art centers, etc. But what is extremely strange when you go there for such a long way, you see nothing for what they usually do. And that's the same. So the same is with also why I was asking is the Kunstwerke, also KW Institute. It's a pity that the curator or the visitors from far away don't know what this institution is at all. This is
what it can be.
I know what it can be. Or
I mean, this is what they don't seem to know. What it could be.
What it could be. Yeah, thank you, Juan. We go now to the audience first. Yeah. hope you have some questions. If not, it's also fine. But so we have drinks at the bar, yeah, and talk more informally. What I'm, you know, what I'm very much looking forward to see 45 new productions.
Me too. Yeah. I don't know what they are.
No, I think this is really fantastic. I think this is an exhibition made as a biennial made up of new works, and that I think this is the most. I'm always asking myself what is the most important, and I would say the most important that there is new thinking, new works.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Juan.
Thank you. There's a question there.
Also a minute. No, thank you. If it's okay without... Can you hear me?
Yes.
Because it was also what the 45 new words we talked about. And I noted down that in this context you said, I said to them, I like this and this and this. Can you make a new work for 4,000 euro production cost? So my interest would really be, why is it actually so important for you to have so many new works produced? And aren't you afraid to undermine the autonomy of artists within the curator becoming more and more a producer?
What do you mean? You're concerned about the low production budget, or the?
No, not at all. That's not relevant.
No.
But for you to stimulate the artists making new works
Yeah.
according to what you like within their oeuvre.
Yeah, I don't see it as a problem because artists are always making new works. I'm just giving them an occasion to make one of those in public, you know, to present one of those.
With a P in front. Work with a P in front.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I mean, what do you mean? Like, now the works belong to me? No, they don't. They're the artists.
A new work with a new P in front.
Yeah. Yeah, I got
You know,
it. But
it's
But the commissioned work is really a different work than a autonomous work. And I think it's a very relevant question nowadays.
yeah. What is an autonomous work?
Yeah, exactly. What is an autonomous work? But why, actually, my question is just very personal to you. What is for you so exciting to have 45 new works shown? Just to stimulate production in
No, the 45 doesn't matter. I mean, the 45 is an incidental number. It's more the fact that the Biennale is not about 2 or 4 years ago. It's about this year. And I want the Biennale to be present, and I want the works to be present, and I want people to go to the Biennale and get the sense that they are looking at something that was thought and generated for the moment in which you are standing with the work, and not borrowed a piece from another context. This is the context, and this is the occasion for this encounter between you and the artwork. And this is why it's important for me that it's done for the Berlin Biennale. And this is what museums don't do, and this is what many of the biennales are not doing anymore, because for them, if I was not doing new works, I could have 150 artists, which is the tendency now. But I don't have that interest. What I want is to invite people to make a new piece. And not all of them are new works. Some artists said to me at some point, actually, I want to present a modified version of this work. It's 3 artists. And I said, that's fine. It's not a problem. Yeah, 3 of them. But most of them wanted to make a new work anyway, so I'm not imposing.
But you know, maybe to add something, you know, there are the participants. I think they are old enough to say no. You know. So,
is there anybody that says no?
I think the problem is very simple. You need a P, a new pink P. Yeah. Berlin.
Thank you.
you know, I don't. You know, as a biennial for me, it's also not a museum.
Yeah.
you know. So it's not a, it's temporary, in a way, timely and temporary.
Yeah, but exactly that is maybe what I find so interesting, that in particular because it's temporary, you have a lot of new works produced for particular this context, which that point I understand. But then I wonder what those works will be afterwards. Will they be always the works produced for this Biennale, commissioned by you? Or will they be at one, yeah, in themselves works, because you say the context is what you like so much about commissioning?
I imagine many of them would be the works commissioned for the 8th Berlin Biennale. Is there some? I don't see the problem with that.
But there is a really, in many cases and very often, there is a relationship between artists and curators. So there is nothing wrong with it. And that would be a completely different concept. I think so. But, and you know, of course there is a how I understand it, there is a curatorial authorship, but each individual artist is responsible for his own authorship. Of course, you know, who is doing something yeah,
I mean, I guess I'm trying not to say that I don't have much sympathy for this idea that the artists are the victims of curatorial authorship. This is not the case at all. I don't think it's true, and in the sense that it's the 8th Berlin Biennale, I don't own the Berlin Biennale either. It's the Berlin Biennale who commissioned these works. They're not commissioned for the 8th Berlin Biennale, by the way, they're commissioned for the Berlin Biennale. So any work that has been made for the Berlin Biennale has that structural, you know, situation with it, but it's not mine necessarily. It's the foundation, to put it this. So, in terms of this relationship between curators and artists, quite frankly, the separation between curators and artists was made by galleries. So, you know, it's not really by ourselves. Galleries who, specific galleries, not all of them, but the commercial system wants to separate all the elements of the art world because it wants to be the broker of all the transactions that happen within it. So this is also something that you have to contemplate when you are talking about the relationship between curatorial authorship, artistic production, and so on. You're talking about an antagonism that is an animosity even that is generated and even, you know, fostered by the gallery system. And that in itself is never really addressed. And in terms of ourselves, I mean, it's a kind of what Nicolaus says. It's a conversation that is born out of a relationship that is also a friendship. So how is it that at the moment in which Jan, Vo, and I have, you know, are doing an exhibition together, become enemies? We are not enemies of each other at all, even though we sometimes are angry at each other. But the work is there because, and the Biennale is there also because we have this relationship. So it's also the kind of, it's not that as asymmetrical. And as a curator, I can tell you some artists, you are very nervous about approaching them and asking them to do something for your Biennale. So it's a different series of relationships that you enter into.
Okay, yeah, I'm talking with the micro. Yeah, and my question was about the political influence that nowadays this international structure of art and especially the biennales have, and that are now clashing with the national interests or more and more with the cities that have their political interest, or that now fear that the next Berlin Biennale will be an uproar again, and oh no, we don't want that, or something like that. And what now behind this stands, or the question is more that what is this? Should the art be? What is? Yeah, it's a question about autonomy also. Where since which point? At which point? Could the art? Is the art? saying, okay, yeah, we're just presenting works and doing your political city projects that city development, everything, and at which point is there this cognitive, artistic, you could say, an own political stance that then that perhaps should not also be, that it's a pity that it's always suppressed by this, or is just funded always by the state, but should not more put own stages up. So, or more at which point is the political pressure from the arts strong enough to not withdraw to the interests of the cities? It's more like a philosophical question at the art scene at all in all the biennials, because when do you say, okay, I'm doing this and it's for the city, it's good, and when is more like that?
I'll try. Do you have an answer? Maybe you want to start?
It's mega complex, of course. In general, and I have curated also festivals and biennials. I think institutions are more important in the long run than festivals. You know. So that would be it's an indirect answer. If we would have to decide also for artistic, for art production or for cultural production as such, I always would go for the institution and not for the festival in the end. For which only appears every or for the biennial. But it's not that I don't like it, but I think.
But you have to say that, and I have to say the opposite.
Yeah, please. Of course. No, it's not true. You will work in an institution again. However, I think we should have a drink. Yeah. Okay. Come upstairs, please.